glasses. Y'all are beautiful. Look at me. I'm beautiful. Not hard to look at, right? I'm charming. I mean, I got some stuff to work on. Maybe a few sit-ups, a little walking, but overall, I'm amazing. You know that. And yet, I was disinvited to a death row party. Can you believe that? Bet you didn't even know that was a thing, huh? No, I'm sure most of us have been left out of a party at some point. Maybe you were not told outright. You were just sort of forgotten. But being disinvited, now that's not the same thing, right? Normally, I'll be laughing, but this was different. So yes, I was disinvited from a party on death row. Let me introduce myself. My name is Renaldo Hudson. I've lived on Illinois death row for 13 long, treacherous years. But today, I want to tell you about the day I realized something about myself. Something that, well, it changed me. It's early morning around 6. I'm in my cell on death row. I'm an early bird, always have been. So by then, I had made my first cup of coffee and turned on the TV to CNN, C-SPAN. I might be sketching. I'm an artist. So I start most days sketching ideas for paintings. Around 6:45, you'll hear it. That familiar sound of a cart, the one with all the keys. Each death row cell had its own key. You'll hear that heavy cart rolling in, signaling the day was about to begin. People waking up, officers doing the morning count. You had to move, show you were alive. Now, some officers were kind, you know. They'd talk to you like a human being. But others, well, they made it their personal mission to make every moment hell. But no matter what, the routine was the same. Count, shower, yard time. I was a regular at the yard. Working out was my thing. Every morning, an officer would ask, "Are you going to the yard?" "Yes, sir." It was like clockwork. But this one day, when I got to the yard, none of my usual crew was there. So I did my workout anyway, pretending not to notice. But I noticed. After the yard, I went to the shower, and by chance, one of my friends was in the next stall. So I asked him, "Hey man, where was everybody? Why didn't you show up this morning?" He took a deep breath, and then he said, "It was one of the brothers' birthday." So I'm like, the guys went to the rec room to celebrate? So I asked, "Why didn't you tell me? I would have been there." And then he hit me with it. "Bro, nobody wanted you at the party." I'm thinking, what? Me? I mean, people like me. I'm one of the guys, right? Then he said, "Nardo, you're one of the guys. But you're in this special kind of category. You're a bug, homie." "A bug, homie? You know what that means. It means you're unpredictable. You're unstable. You're everything no one wants to be around. These were some of the most hardened people you could imagine. And they were turning their noses up at me. It was like I had become Michael Myers or something. I had become the monster of death row. That moment hit me. I was flabbergasted. For the first time, I stopped blaming the world. I stopped looking at others as the problem, and I started looking at myself. That's when something changed. Being disinvited, it wasn't just about the party. It was about me and who I had become. It made me question everything, because if people on death row saw something in me that scared them, well, maybe I needed to see it too. I was disinvited from a party, but that moment, it saved me. Sentenced to death. I was sentenced to die by lethal injection for a crime I committed in 1983, a robbery murder. I want to be transparent with you today. It's essential to acknowledge my humanity, and equally important to remember the life that was lost, the harm that was done, and the cost of my journey to sobriety, both emotionally and physically. I owe it to Mr. Peterson, the man whose life I took, and to everyone impacted, to share this with the deepest respect. According to the law, because I committed murder during the robbery, I qualified for the death penalty. The aggravating factors in my case were clear and undeniable. The facts of the crime will never change. That's what aggravating factors are. But mitigating factors, those tell the story. That led up to that moment. They helped to explain how I could end up on such a path. I stood in front of a courtroom, young, black, facing a white judge, white lawyers, and an overwhelmingly white jury. I felt the weight of their anger. There were 2 black jurors, and I sensed something deep in them. Maybe it was shame, maybe anger. In my mind, they saw me as a disgrace, as someone misrepresenting the beauty and the integrity of our people. They didn't want to be associated with me. It's painful to unpack that, but I believe it's part of the truth. The mitigating factors of my life, the things that shaped me, were not fully considered. The shootings, the molestations, things I didn't speak of for so long, are part of my story. It's like a doctor diagnosing a patient. You have to look at the entire history to understand the cause of the damage. But in the criminal legal system, these mitigating factors often get overlooked, especially when a young black person commits a crime against a white person. I'm mindful of triggers as I share this, because it's heavy. I'm the person responsible for the offense that sent me to death row. I own my actions, and I'll never try to dodge that responsibility. But I'm not the offense itself. My childhood is marked by trauma. First was my twins' death, and then when I was just a teenager, my older brother William shot me at point-blank range with a 12-gauge shotgun. That same day, William killed 2 other family members and injured 7. When I came out of the hospital, I didn't receive comfort. I was met with fear. My cousins who survived the shooting saw me and had panic attacks because I looked so much like my brother. At 15, I didn't understand triggers. I didn't understand trauma. or why my family rejected me. I was also carrying the weight of being blamed for my brother's actions. My uncle told me it was my fault for agreeing to let William come back home from the juvenile detention. Imagine a child already suffering, being told that they were responsible for such horror. I couldn't even read or write. In the years that followed, I was a functioning illiterate trying to survive, trying to drown my mental anguish with drugs. Drugs like PCP became my escape. I walked around in a world like something out of Roger Rabbit. A fantasy to block out the pain. To feed that habit, I did things I'm ashamed of today. Things I didn't understand were wrong at the time. I got involved with older women. I slept with them for money, food, or a place to stay. It was survival. And then, in my drug-induced desperation, I plotted a robbery. I fantasized about a life free of worry. But reality doesn't follow fantasy. When Mr. Peterson resisted, things spiraled out of control. I never intended for him to die. But the truth is, he did. And I can never undo that. After the murder, I found myself back in the Cook County Jail, facing not just the system, but my own demons. During my 7 years there, I acted out of fear, even attempted to escape. But know this, I wasn't a hardened criminal. I was scared, broken, trying to survive in a world that felt like it was closing in on me. Good people can do horrible things. Inside, I was just little Renaldo, the kid who wanted to be hugged and loved everyone. But I had become someone I couldn't recognize. The light was there, but it was very deep and dark. My story doesn't begin or end with my crime. It's the story of trauma, pain, survival, and eventually healing. This is just the beginning of what led me to the man you see before you today. Path to prison. My path to prison. When I think back over my life, I can clearly see the signs that led me there. The neglect, the cracks in the road, the wounds left untreated, and the ignorance of my own illiteracy. Accountability and responsibility were not parts of my childhood. As a child, I had the liberties of an adult, which were simply too much, especially without responsible grown-ups guiding me. I thought I was making conscious decisions, that I was in control, but now I understand I was operating under emotional duress. I didn't truly grasp the weight of my actions or the legal consequences that came with the criminal activity I started to engage in. I wasn't some diabolical criminal mastermind. In fact, I might go down as one of the dumbest criminals of all time. It's true. I thought stealing candy bars and ice cream, or even a bike, was a way to survive. One memory stands out. I must have been around 11 or 12 years old. I was walking from Stony Island back to 75th in Halston, where I lived with my father in an abandoned building. I was exhausted, thirsty, and just drained. I saw this kid filling his bike tire at the gas station on Vince Inn, and I thought, I'm bigger than him. I'm taking that bike. Without thinking, I walked over, pushed him aside, and rode the bike straight home. I parked it right out front, not realizing the stupidity of my action. About 20 minutes later, someone knocked on the door. thinking it was a friend. I rushed outside, only to be snatched up, thrown to the ground, and handcuffed. Here's the kicker. The kid's uncle or father was a Chicago policeman, a regular in the neighborhood. They saw the bike right there on my porch. I can only imagine them thinking, this has to be the dumbest kid in the world. The cop roughed me up. Not too much, but enough to scare me. I knew what I had done was wrong, but I didn't fully understand the seriousness of it. My father came and got me, and once again, there were no consequences. No one set me down to explain what I've done was wrong in a way that would really stick with me. About a year later, I was hanging with my friends, drinking, smoking, and trying to figure out how to get more. One of them had the bright idea to break into a house, steal a TV, a radio, maybe find some cash. We knew where to pawn stolen goods or trade them for alcohol. It became so normal to us, a means of survival. It got to the point where I didn't even think it was wrong anymore. It was just how I lived. But once again, in all my brilliance, I made dumb moves. I broke into a house, then walked right back to my house on 75th and Austin. And the police were on me in no time. They didn't even need to solve the crime. I made it easy for them. Over the next year and a half, I was arrested for burglary. And each time I was released back to my father again. What I needed was intervention. And that intervention never came. But y'all, I need to sit walk. Thank you for your patience. Let me tell you a little story about Lulu. When I was a kid, Lulu would wander around the neighborhood. She was this middle-aged black and Puerto Rican woman with this really long, beautiful hair. I remember her husband threatening to pull her pretty-ass hair. As a kid, I took an unexpected liking to her, almost like I had this need to protect her. I remember Lulu feeling warm when she hugged me and smelled good. I didn't understand it then, but I was drawn to her because I was missing that mother figure in my own life. You see me, a little boy, picking Lulu up out of the gutter, walking her home, while the neighborhood kids would tease me. Lulu wasn't my mother, but she called me Baby Renaldo. And even though the kids kept teasing me, saying, "Your mama calling you, your mama calling you," I never felt ashamed. In fact, I'll run toward her voice because deep down, I felt I needed to be there for her. See, Lulu had an alcoholic husband who smacked her around. I'll run up to her, wrapping my little arms around her, trying to protect her. Funny thing is, when I did that, he stopped. I think back on those days with Lulu, I've come to understand, at my core, I'm deeply connected to family, community, and people. I care about folks beyond the surface, beyond what the world wants to label them. I saw something in Lulu beyond her struggle. At her core, she was a sweet lady, and that sweetness spoke to me. She became like family to me, and I didn't care what others thought. I see now that there was a spirit in me, one that just hadn't been nurtured. When I was a kid, I was happy. I was trusting, and people liked me. I'm serious, y'all. People liked me. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was a big hugger. And back then, The adults in my neighborhood used to call me over. Come here, boy, and give me a hug. And you know what? Those hugs weren't just for me. They were for them too. I was giving them pure love, and it's energized them. They saw a kid hungry for love, lost in neglect of his biological family, but full of life. Bug home. Prison. It's a place, not one that shapes or transforms you, but one that reveals who you are. Like most oppressors do, they expose your strengths and your weaknesses. Prison, in its twisted way, offers a certain comfort because you can hide in the crowd. If you're not careful, the crowd will eat you alive. And the crowd I'm talking about is more than the people. It's the philosophy that governs an ungovernable space. Prison isn't a controlled environment. They will put your body in a cell, even lock you down, but they can't control your mind. Not in all my years behind bars. There's force, there's compliance, but no real control. That's an illusion. So who did I become in prison? A lot of my friends, my comrades, they call me a bug. That means I was unpredictable. Someone who might spaz out at any moment, from calm to chaos in a heartbeat. But that bugging out, that was born out of fear. I feared being consumed by the prison itself. It began the first time I went to Cook County Jail. I had committed a strong armed robbery, rousted a man to the ground and stole his car. This was in Chicago back in the early 80s, just a month before the murder that sent me to prison for 37 years. After I took his car, I drove it around, getting high. Eventually, I ran out of gas. That's when a state trooper pulled over. I was tired, and tired of living this life. So when the trooper asked me what was going on, I just came clean. I said, "This car is stolen." And you know what the trooper said? "I know, kid. Don't go back to that car." I laughed, thinking, here I am trying to turn myself in. And he's telling me he's trying to help me. But I knew I had to face what I had done. I ended up in the Cook County Jail, the House of Corrections. There were incarcerated people we called bond bosses. They were running the place for the guards. They'd screen new arrivals, trying to figure out if you were part of a gang, neutral, or just weak. And if you don't measure up, well, you'll get handled. Now I'm 6'1", and the guy in front of me was even bigger, 6'2", 360 pounds, easy. And he got shook down before me, taken to the shower by the bond bosses. I heard him start crying. And then it turned. Well, let's just say it turned ugly. I knew I couldn't let that happen to me. I was sitting on this wooden bench, and I started pulling a loose piece of wood from it. By the time they came to me, I had that piece of wood in my hand. And when they told me I was next, I just started swinging. I was yelling at the top of my lungs, 75th Street, fool! God damn it! You don't fuck with me! I went crazy on that guy, beating him until the guards came running. They tackled me, shackled me, and dragged me off. And as they pulled me away, I heard someone shout, "Big homie's a bug." From then on, that was my label, a bug. Someone unpredictable, dangerous. And over the next 7 years in the Cook County Jail, my behavior only reinforced that reputation. But the truth was, I just didn't want to be raped. I didn't want to be treated like many others, passed around from bump to bump like a piece of meat. But that's the thing about prison. It reveals you. It pulls out the parts of you you didn't even know existed. You crawl, you bite, you sting. You do what you have to do to survive. And in surviving, sometimes you lose parts of yourself. I would rather be a bug than a victim. Disinvited. So a death row birthday party. I get why that might sound strange. Celebrating on death row, but once you're condemned,
come on, bro.
Once you're condemned, any chance to mark life feels essential. We became family to each other, and birthdays became milestones. Sorry.
Come on, bro.
We became family to each other, and birthdays became milestones, reminders that we've survived another year. To celebrate, we gathered in the rec room, our only place to come together. Everyone contributing what they could. Prison-made cake, pies, and sometimes a bit of nook-nook or hooch. The homemade brew, those who knew the process. Those gatherings were meaningful, but eventually, even here, I became an outsider, disinvited from the place where we all belonged, so I thought. Now, whatever you imagine death row is like from TV, books, or a movie, I can tell you this, it's far more complicated than that. Imagine trying to live a normal life while knowing your execution is coming. No matter how hard you try, you can't fully accept the fact that your life is set to be taken. So, what is the escape? For many of us, it was drugs and alcohol. I became what you would call a connoisseur. I drank a lot of wine. I did drink a lot. I'm sorry. It was unexpected. I used to brew a lot of foods. Eat from ingredients we scrambled bread, fruits, and sugar. They eventually took sugar off the commissary because we were misusing it. We used to get drunk to drown out the screams. On death row, you constantly heard people cry out at night. I'm innocent! I shouldn't be here! But here's the truth. And people might get mad at me for saying this. But back then, even the people who were on death row didn't believe anyone could be innocent. It was impossible in our minds. Ain't nobody innocent on death row. It turns out that some of the very people we doubted were innocent. The system wasn't concerned with innocence or guilt as much as it was concerned with upholding process. The system didn't care who I was, but I was struggling to understand who I had become versus the real me. I had mastered pretending, playing this role so well that I started to believe I was this person this bug that had to intimidate, manipulate, and control. I remember walking through a unit, trying to come up with words and expressions that would make people fear me. It wasn't in my heart, but I knew the power of words. So I tried to act tough, even though I was in handcuffs, marching back to my cell. I acted like I was free to carry out whatever wild thought ran through my mind. But things changed when an incident landed me in solitary confinement for assaulting an officer. So here I was in solitary, wrestling with who I had become. Then a moment of clarity came from a tape I got of Minister Louis Farrakhan. He asked, "Who are you good for? Are you good for nothing?" I had believed the lies that I should hate more, especially the people who had caused me so much harm over the years. I thought it was my duty to hate, but he shattered that. Farrakhan was clear. Acting like a beast doesn't honor our cause, and it doesn't honor God. I was projecting hell into the world, not heaven. It was around this time when I got disinvited from the death row party. The people around me were telling me I was nothing but the echoes of yesterday. When I was sentenced to die, the state had declared there was nothing redeemable about me. Their solution was execution. All of this hit me hard while I was in that solitary cell. Grown man's time out. When I was in solitary, this warden came to my cell and gave me the Riot Act that led to something unexpected. He challenged me to learn scripture, and for every verse I memorized, he would give me a day off my segregation time. This was yet another turning point in my life. I didn't tell him I already knew the Bible pretty well. I had learned scripture to use as a weapon, to fight, not to grow. My first thought was, I got this sucker. I'll be out of segregation tomorrow with all the verses I can pull. So when he came back the following week, I proudly recited the shortest scripture in the Bible. Jesus wept. I was sure I had outsmarted him. I was proud of myself for real. But then he asked me something I wasn't prepared for. He asked, "Why did he weep, Hudson?" I didn't have the answer. That wasn't part of the ordeal. But it made me think deeper. Why did he weep? It made me remember a passage where Jesus looked out at the scattered sheep and said to the harvest that the harvest was plentiful, but the laborers were few. I started to ask myself, am I a laborer? Or am I just another person running from my purpose? That was the beginning of my transformation. It made me realize I had much more to give to humanity than violence. That young boy, little Renaldo, who got lost in trauma, was a loving, caring person. He was just hidden under layers of hurt. At that moment, I made a vow. I would never harm another person again. I have to admit, much of that realization came from that Farrakhan team. It challenged me in a way I didn't expect. He asked, if you were to die today, would anyone cry for you? I knew I didn't want to be someone people feared. I didn't want to live a life where no one would shed a tear when I was gone. That was revolutionary for me. I turned my life around, not because I thought I'd walk free, but because I wanted someone to cry for me when the state put me to sleep. What surprised me most was that people actually started to like me when I stopped hiding the real me. My transformation became infectious. I went from being one of the most dangerous people on Illinois' death row to a gallery worker. That's a person trusted to clean the sale house and feed the guys. I went from being a level E to someone who's never let out of the cell, to someone the officers trust to walk freely among them. One of the most powerful moments in this journey came when the officer I had once assaulted came back to work on the unit. The captain came and told me they had to lock me up. They didn't want any trouble. I understood, but then something incredible happened. The officer himself came to my cell and told me, "Hudson, your transformation is inspiring. I don't want them to lock you up because of me. In fact, I told them to let you out because it's clear you've turned your life around." That flowed me. The very man I had harmed stood up for me. It brought tears to my eyes. It only strengthened my commitment to personal transformation. I knew then that if he could see my change, then others could too. And that's what I wanted for everyone, to see that no matter how low you get, there's always a way to the person you were meant to be. My transformation. It's hard for people to see someone's personal transformation when they see you in a specific way. I knew I needed to separate myself not only from the actions and the memories of my brother, but also my actions as a former gang member. I knew I needed to personally transition away from Islam to Christianity. I knew I needed to be making decisions to be the best me and not the person the world expected me to be. I began to recognize that the real power isn't in what others say about you, but what you say about yourself. I began to be in control of my triggers and the way I see myself. How I responded to the world is completely up to me, no one else. I began to evaluate when I was being abrasive, when I was being defensive, when I was being unkind. I developed a checklist of how I was responding to people. In fact, I remember my transformation being so apparent that one day one of the deputy directors was walking down the gallery, and I said hello to him. I had committed myself to speaking to everyone and being kind and smiling. And he walked past the cell and did a double take and stepped back and said, "Hudson?" And I smiled. "Yes, sir." He said, "What happened to you? What in the hell is going on?" It's one of those funny moments when you realize, hey, you know you're changing. And when people start to notice, it helps you to be a better human being. It was subtle moments in the quiet that would motivate me to keep moving forward. I knew I was on to something. I want to be really clear. I was not transforming my life with the hope of being let out of prison. I was not trying to manipulate the system. I did not play with my transformation. I committed to it. I really did. I went from being the guy frowning and throwing fists to being the man who hugged everyone on the yard. I went from being called the bug of death row to the hug king. Ain't that something? It's funny when I think about it. Back then, I'll step out into the yard and everyone, including me, had these hard mugs on our faces. We did. You know, real mean. Mugging is an attempt to be intimidating. Don't mess with me. Back in the Illinois Department of Correction, if you look up our mug shots, man, we all have these faces like we were carved from stone. But the truth, most of us, deep down, we were soft inside. Creamy even. Just scared kids who had gotten real good at pretending to be hard on the outside. I was one of those kids. And for a long time, I was known as the guy who punched you without a second thought. But something shifted inside of me. You're all going to love this. I remember one day, I had been hugging the guys on the yard for a while. At first, let me tell you, these tough men, guys who thought they had to be hard 24/7, they were so confused. Some of them resisted at first, but it didn't take long. Eventually, I started my rounds, going to each of the 9 other brothers on the yard, and I would give each of them a hug. It wasn't long before I saw smiles, real smiles, on the faces society had already given up on. Faces that had been written off as the worst of the worst. But you know what? That's just the label. Deep inside, we were good men who had made bad choices. I am not saying that to minimize any pain or harm caused. One day, I decided to test this hug thing. Instead of doing my usual round, I went straight to the weight tower, started lifting. And after a minute, I looked up and noticed no one else was working out. They were all just watching me. And then my boy Tony, he came over. He looked. He like, man, I don't know what's going on, what the hell is wrong with you, but I want my damn hug. I just started laughing. I couldn't stop laughing. I realized then, this wasn't just a little gesture. This mattered. And before I knew it, all the guys were like, shit, man, I thought you were a stripper today. Give me my hug. That's when I knew. I turned a death row yard into a hug fest. I've gone from being one of the most dangerous men in that place to the hug king. Can you believe it? But here's what I've learned. Society can condemn you. They can call you the worst, but you don't have to condemn yourself. There's love. There's our humanity. Those hugs became contagious. They changed behavior. The next thing I knew, guys were hugging each other, passing that little piece of care and connection to one another. Underneath the act, the crime, the mistakes, we were all just hurting human beings, reaching for any scraps of humanity that was there. Those hugs, weren't just gestures. They were healing. From the bug of death row to the king. That's something. Isn't that something? Yeah. I'm almost done. Liberated, not exonerated. I'm here before you today, not as an exonerated man, but as someone liberated. A man who has transformed his life so that the light I walk in now is brighter than the darkness I once lived in. My story and the journey is not about proving innocence. It's about showing that even those of us who have committed harm can evolve into something beautiful. It's a part of the bigger picture of our criminal legal system. Sometimes I saw firsthand during my 13 years on Illinois' death row. But my journey is not one of innocence. I wasn't exonerated because I did commit the crime that put me in prison. I confessed to the offense that sent me to death row, and it's something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. But here's where the critical difference lies. I am not the offense. There are aggravating factors in every crime. Those are the facts of the case. In mine, someone lost their life because of my action. I cannot run from that. But what I can do is face the truth and say to the family who lost someone because of my brokenness inside of me that I'm deeply sorry. I couldn't appreciate the criminality of my actions at the time. But I am liberated. Liberated from the sewage that had become my norm, from the narrative that someone who caused harm can never be part of you. I stand before you, sit before you, now as a living proof of its truth. I've worked tirelessly inside the Illinois Department of Corrections, not just for myself, but to help others out of the chaos that surrounds all of us. I've personally intervened in thousands of conflicts, helped to bring peace where violence was the only way people knew to respond. I've destroyed hundreds of shanks that were brought to me by people who wanted to make a change but needed someone to trust. I made sure they knew they could bring their worst moment. I stood with them because I still was one of them. According to the law, I will always be a convicted felon, but what I have changed is how I live my life. My liberation came because of someone fully telling my story. Jennifer Sobel, my extraordinary words, she didn't just litigate my case. She shared my journey. She told the story of my potential, of the person I had become behind those walls. And it was through her work and her gift as a master storyteller that people could see me, not just the crime I committed, but as the person who has risen above it. I had 2 showers of grace. The first was Governor George Bryant commuting my sentence from death to life. The second was Governor J.B. Pritzker, who commuted my sentence from life to time considered served. Both were incredible moments, but they were only possible because my story was told. It was Jenny's tireless work, her commitment to truth and justice, that gave me this second chance, this liberation. I am a living testament to the fact that people can change. I've been transformed. Never say that people cannot change. You just heard my story. I am a physical manifestation of what a transformed life can and should be. Thank you.